Hi everyone. So we're going through the DigiNinja bootcamp. This is sort of the orientation for the portfolio, which is should be week 4. We're going to go through just sort of have a basic workflow to develop and to submit your workflow. Now it's going to be a little more involved and a little more complicated, primarily because um, a few things might be new to everyone, and parts of this whole process, such as the use of Git, might be a little intimidating initially, but over time it's going to get easier. Um, Basically, what I would recommend is do not fear the command line. That's definitely not something you want to fear. So hopefully you'll have enough command line knowledge to be able to kind of get through this. But there are other alternative tools too to help with the process, and we might take a look at a couple in the future. But for now, this is the portfolio project. It's basically going to be what's called a static HTML, CSS, potentially JavaScript website. And all that means is, well, at this point, you would have done your Code Academy courses, and so what that means for you is that it doesn't have any dynamic code like PHP or anything like that, or like things that are in WordPress, which could store things in databases and have security and things like that. Static page is something that just you see it and it's right there. An example of a static page is Bootstrap. Get Bootstrap. Well, they changed it a lot ever since I'd last seen it, so maybe that's not even a good example. Basically, it's just plain HTML and CSS and nothing else, and JavaScript, and that's about it. It's not really making any major changes to the website based on person-to-person experiences. Like, you're not logging into your portfolio. Your portfolio just displays and for everyone to see. And so that's what a static website is. So the first thing to do, if you haven't done it, and I'll do it as the Trinity EDU student demo account, log into GitHub with your student account. Go to the Trinity EDU / DigiNinja, and I will just post that here. Oops. And fork it. So go ahead and fork it. I click the fork button right there. A fork is basically your own version of the project. So mentors can put more information in the Trinity EDU DigiNinja project. Oh, I have to probably refresh it. So if that happens, just refresh. But a fork is basically your own version of the project. Notice that after I had forked it, instead of saying Trinity EDU / DigiNinja, and now it says Trinity EDU student demo / DigiNinja. And notice it says forked from this. And a fork is basically your own version of a repository. It's a copy of it pretty much, but you can make changes independently of the main one, and you can also get the code changes from the main fork. We'll call that upstream. Okay, so after you've created a fork of DigiNinja and you have your own version, your own copy of DigiNinja, it'll have all my changes and things like that, but you can look over that for a moment. The next thing you're probably going to need to do is just take a look at week 4 and the instructions and stuff like that. but you'll probably not see anything at this time, so that's not overly important for now. You want to clone your fork. Don't clone the Trinity EDU DigiNinja. You want to clone your fork to your desktop, right? So how do you do that? Well, you look at this clone or download right there. Click it. Now there's two ways to clone. One is using HTTPS, and the other is using SSH. SSH is going to be a lot faster in terms of workflow, but we're not going to use it because it's probably a little more complicated. So we're just going to go ahead and use the HTTPS, and an HTTPS clone it starts with HTTPS. And so I'll copy this to the clipboard. Clone repo. But I probably cannot clone it until I've actually installed Git. I have it installed, so I won't go through this process. But if you have not installed Git already, make sure you download it for your platform. This appears as Mac for me because I'm using a Mac, but it'll appear as Windows for you if you're using Windows. And just install with all the defaults, basically. And that really means just keep pressing next, 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 next after you install Git. And this website is here. So Git is a client. The Git itself is a client system, right? GitHub is a public repository for using the Git client. There's other ones too. For example, Bitbucket. Bitbucket is another one. It's kind of a replacement for GitHub. Another example. Another one is GitLab. But these are all different systems that you can use as a replacement for GitHub, but we're just going to use GitHub because that's the thing that most people use anyway. So Git is a client. GitHub is a public system for the Git client. So whether you use GitHub, whether you use Bitbucket, or whether you use GitLab or any of those, you still need to get this Git client. And when you come to this page, you're gonna see that you should see the download for your corresponding operating system, and so you go ahead and install that. After you've installed it, we're coming back to the clone repo portion. So I'll take the clone right here, copy it. And because these are public repositories, we won't have too many issues. But open a terminal. For me, it'll be iTerm. If you're a Windows user, go to your Start menu. For git bash and start it. So it should appear on your system, whether you're using a terminal. I'm using a terminal, or you can use git bash. They're pretty much the same thing. If you install the Windows version, git bash will give you what's called Unix utilities. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about what that involves. It just means it gives you a bunch of extra features in the terminal that Git needs, the Git client needs in order to do it. Okay. So once you've started it, go ahead and clone the repo, and the command will be something like git clone. Well, actually, you want to go to the directory first. Go to directory in terminal. So I'm going to go to my documents. So I'll just tell you what I just did. CD means change directory. When you open git bash, you're going to get access to all these commands as well. So so I went directly to the documents, and I listed the documents here. I have three folders in the folder documents folder. Then I went change directory into Trinity student. I listed the contents again, ls, and there's nothing in there. It's an empty folder, and I just listed this directory path for me. For me, the path looks like this. For you, the path may look like something else because you may be on Windows, but that's really a small technical thing. Now I'm going to run my git clone command. And so it'll be git clone, and it's going to be your fork. So I'm basically going to run this command, git clone, and then this is my fork of the DigiNinja repository, the student fork. You're going to use your student fork. So I copied it from here, and now I'm going to paste it here. You can type it in manually if you want. And so what clone does, first we're using the git client. The git client is using the clone command, and the clone command needs the repository to clone from, right? This can be a GitHub HTTPS URL, it can be a Bitbucket one, or it can be a GitLab one, or anything else. Basically, the Git client is going to take the repository from this URL, this user account, and this repository name. And all I have to do after I type all that is press enter. So notice it's cloned DigiNinja. All this is some extra statistics, but basically after it returns all these dones and stuff like that, I can list the contents of Trinity student directory, and you should just see DigiNinja. I can now go into DigiNinja itself, list the contents, and you can see the README week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, just like you have here in the fork. Next, you'd probably want to install a code editor. I'm just going to use Visual Studio Code in our demos, but you can really use whatever you want. There are many code editors out there. Some people just use Notepad. Some people like to use Notepad++. I don't think there's only that's not for that's for Windows only. Certain editors are for certain operating systems, and there's some editors that work for pretty much all operating systems. This one, I think this one is an example of that, Visual Studio Code. It's made by Microsoft. It's open source. You can use it freely, and you can write code with it. And what I like about Visual Studio Code is it has these four basic features. IntelliSense is basically going to help you when you're typing things. Notice that it attempts to try to figure out what you want to type and lists them down here in this dialog, and you can really it can help you narrow down to what you want to write in your code without manually typing everything. So it'll help you do some typing. We're not worrying so much about debugging. It does have a few built-in Git features, which is kind of nice. It'll save you on a little bit of workflow using the Git client, which is good. One of my favorite parts of VS Code is the extensions. Basically, there's a marketplace of extensions, which are basically plugins, and it gives your VS Code editor more features. Like these are examples of extensions listed right here in this image. Basically, it gives your code. You can customize it, and you can automatically get more features and more capabilities inside your editor. This isn't new. This concept isn't anything specific to VS Code. There are many other editors that do this as well. I'm only choosing this because it runs on all these platforms, which would be Windows, Linux, and Mac. So download the appropriate one for your platform and get it set up, and then and then we'll take a look at VS Code itself. Let me come back to this GitHub repository really fast, and let's take a look. So I've cloned this repository, but I want to be able to push up to my repository, right? I want to be able to make a code change and submit it. Well, in order to do that, I need to set up the Git configuration. So these are a couple things that you have to do for the first time. You don't have to do this every single time. It's just the first time. Okay. So this configuration applies globally, but I'm going to change this to local. You can do either or. Wouldn't be a big problem, but I'm going to use local because I have other repositories and other accounts on my system. So the name really doesn't matter. Put spaces. I like to type in commands in editor sometimes if they get really long, and then after I type them in the editor, I like to bring them in the console. But the email has to be accurate, I believe. So let's hopefully try to get this right. Because the reason the email has to be accurate is because the email is bound to your GitHub account. So because of that, In order for you to make changes on your local system and then push them up to GitHub, you're going to need to configure your email. So notice I have these two commands now: git config for configuration, local for that, also only that one GitHub repository. The user.name is just a name that I'm using. It doesn't have to be your GitHub like username. You can make it that way if you want to, but you can just put your first and last name, capitalize the first letters, and that's fine. And the local user email, which is here. So I'm going to run these two commands in the terminal. Okay, so that was the username. Now I'm going to configure the email. Oops. I think I copied too much. Oh, I got it again. All right, I'll just delete the last one. The tildes are not needed to run the commands, just FYI. I'm including them in the editor for highlighting purposes, formatting purposes, but you don't need to run the command with the tilde. Actually, don't run the command with the tilde. So notice I just ran two commands: git config local user.name and git config local user.email. And so now it should be set up and ready to go at this point to be able to actually make certain changes. Okay, so after you would have downloaded the VS Code, you want to open it. For Windows users, it's going to be your start menu, and you have to find VS Code. I'm a Mac user, so it's going to be available to me in my dashboard, but I'll just open it up right here. Okay. So this is the editor, VS Code. It does a lot of things. It's actually really cool. But the first thing you're going to want to do is just open the folder that you cloned from GitHub. So I'm going to go do that. So I put that in Documents, Trinity Student, and DigiNinja. I'll open it here. Great. So it opened the DigiNinja folder, right? And you can see it has the subfolders and the readmes and stuff like that. Well, there's a lot of features that this code editor has that are actually really good. But you may end up customizing it to your own preferences. This is like the welcome page. There's an X right here where I can close this. This is basically going to be a code tab. I'll close it, so it's not up to me. So you should have some of these shortcut recommendations here. They should be different for your platform. I'm going to try to do as much as possible without using any shortcuts, so that we can just bypass that. And so these are these side panels right here that are for different usages. So the first panel here is basically the Explorer, right? If I open something, every code that I open should come in a new tab. And notice they also appear here in the open editors. I can collapse this. This just means that the code that's already open, the files that are already open. This is for searching for things. So you can really search through this will basically search through your entire project for any, I don't know, code snippets that you want to look for, so you can help navigate it. And it'll show you all these highlighted instances. I look for the word README, so it's looking for the highlighted instances of README in all my code. There's shortcuts for looking through this stuff too, but I'm not using them right now. You can also do find and replace and stuff like that here. It's kind of nice. This tab here is for Git. It's called source control, right? It makes it really easy to do some Git things. And I'm going to show you both the command that we run and the the VS Code features here to use Git as well. So we're going to use Git in both environments. You can choose which one you really want to use. You might just end up wanting to use the Git features in VS Code. But if you want to know all the commands, and that'll be available to you. A lot of times people use both, just for whatever is more convenient. Sometimes writing a command is more convenient. Sometimes just using these little short features are more convenient. Okay. We're going to skip the debugging tab because it's not going to be relevant to us. Finally, the marketplace tab. I really like this thing a lot. You really can search for pretty much anything you can think of. Like maybe I want a CSS extension, right? And as soon as I typed in CSS, it refreshed from the marketplace, and it gave me the capacity to install install some plugins. This one's called JS CSS HTML formatter. So if you install this and you use the features, it'll automatically format your code to make it look presentable in terms of the code. It won't change the code. It'll just change the code in your file. It'll just reformat it. But there's probably an extension for anything you can think of. And it's pretty easy to develop extensions. As you can see, because this extension marketplace is so huge. You don't have to worry about extensions at the moment. I have several extensions that I like to use. I'm not going to cover them necessarily, but it's available to you if you're interested to look at the extension. So you just really type in extension. And then you click on install, and then it'll eventually ask you to restart your editor so it'll bring the extension in there. One of the if we can just go through some of these real quick, you can customize shortcuts and things like that. Or we really don't want to cover that. You can do find replaces here as well as you can go through the menu. There's a lot of things you can do, but I just want to show you one more thing. Down here, this little settings icon, you can open the command palette. So if you don't know what VS Code can do, you can always open the command palette. That's kind of cool. So I can click on command palette, and it'll open this thing. For me, it's actually a shortcut, but I use it as a shortcut. But basically, if I want to do something and I don't know what the shortcut is or where the menu item is or anything like that, I can really just go to this command palette and start typing. Right. So it's opened here. There's this little angle bracket here, but I can now start typing I don't know, Git, right? And it's basically all these Git commands, right? I can just use my arrow keys up and down, and just if I find something if I find a command that I like, I can just press enter, and that's it. It'll do it for me. So that's kind of cool. Many other features are there. I don't know. This is if you have a plugin installed like GitLens or this expand selection or whatever. Those plugin features will show up in this command palette. You can exit out of the command palette by pressing escape, and you can come back to it again using the settings icon in command palette. It's very nice. I mean, I use it all the time. Sometimes I don't even remember what the shortcut is. I just go to the command palette, and it just helps me a lot. Okay, so a lot of interesting things you can do with the command palette. It's kind of nice. Let's go ahead and make some code changes and let's test it out. So I'm going to go to my week 4. I'm going to create a new file. So I right-clicked on week 4. And if I right-click, I can create new files, new folders. I can reveal it, or whatever. There's so many things I can do. There's more options. I see more options here because I have plugins installed, but you may not see those options. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it index.html. Press enter. This is now an HTML file. Okay, so what I did there is, sorry, I didn't even know that was going to be able to happen. So one of the features of VS Code is Emmet. This should be out of the box for you. If you want to create like an HTML block really easily, just type in the word HTML, the 4 letters, press your tab key, and it automatically generated beginning and closing tags. So that's kind of nice. You can either type all that all by yourself, or you can just use Emmet. Let's see what happens if I just type in HTML. Notice that once I open an angle bracket, it listed a bunch of tags that I can possibly type, right? That's part of IntelliSense, part of the feature. So if I start typing in HT, it auto-completes. I can press enter, it will complete it for me. Then I can close it, then I can open another one, and then it's recommending me a close tag HTML, and that's it. I can do that too. So I can use Emmet by just typing HTML and then tab, right? Or I can do something like HTML, close, open, autocomplete right there. Or I can just ignore this thing and just type the whole thing. As you can see, it'll take me way longer if I actually typed it out, depending on your typing skills. But, so that's just the kind of cool thing you can do with this. Well, here's the problem. I've created a file now, but it's going to be versioned, right? And I actually don't want that right now. I'm going to discard the changes. So I went to the Git tab, right? And it's now showing me the changes that I have. If I click on this, this is a brand new file that's there that I created, and Git tracks all your changes. It notices your changes. In order for it to track it, and in order for it to actually bring the code in, you actually have to make an effort. I'm going to revert this change. Reverting it or discarding a change. Discarding a change will just undo anything you've done so far. It's kind of a nice feature. You can always use the editor undos as well, but this will be more useful in the long run. So I'm going to discard this for now. It's actually going to it should actually just remove the file, and it did. When I discarded the change, it removed the file. So now that everything is set up, let's actually look into how to make a code change, right? The best thing to do for any code change that you'd like to make is to create a branch. So we've gone through the Git setup, and now we're going to start the creating your portfolio workflow. Bring this up here. Okay, in order to start creating your portfolio in terms of the project setup, you'll want to first create a branch. Now, in order for you to create a branch, you need to make sure there are no changes here. There are no changes and any file changes listed here. So start with ensuring that there are no changes here. Now, if once changes are committed, you're good to go. You can make branch changes and things like that. But if you have files that are not committed, or you have files that are in this changes area, in this changes section, like I had the index.html before, I can't create a branch. Git will stop me from doing that, unless I'm clever and do a few other things. But we're not going to talk about those clever things. In order for me to create a branch, I need to run a command. So number one, create a branch. A branch is something like a copy of the code that you already have, right? The default branch is always master. It's the master branch. It's the one that displays on GitHub by default, right? And that's the master branch. But so a branch is like a copy of code with a certain name associated with it. Changes can be made to that branch by changing files and saving those files, saving those changes as what's called a commit. And we'll talk about that procedure very quickly. So first thing I need to do is create a branch, and the way I can do that, I might be able to do it here. Maybe not. So I don't know how to create a branch from. Let me see if I can do. Yes. Okay. So I can create a branch by going to the command palette and typing in create branch, and you'll see git create branch right here. And now it's asking me what the branch name to type. For you, it's going to be called portfolio. So that was the VS Code way of doing it. Now the manual way of doing it is this command, git checkout-b portfolio. So if you ran this in the terminal, it would create a branch. So it's basically saying git check out a branch, but then I want you to create it. This flag will help you create it. Portfolio. But I just did it with VS Code using the command palette. And notice down here it no longer says master, it now says portfolio, right? So so master will stay intact, and I can make changes and commits to portfolio and return back to master, and the code will be as master again. But let's kind of work through some of this stuff to see what's going on. So I created a branch called master. The next thing I needed to do is add files. And then after that, I need to commit files. After that, do maybe some setup. I'll talk about what that could mean. Actually, I won't talk about what that means. I'll just push branch. Okay. So these are the basic 5 steps that you would need to create a pull request, which is basically submitting your assignment. But there's a lot of, each of these steps could have many other things involved. So let's start by creating an index.html anyway. So I'm going back to this files tab right here. I'm going to week 4. So for week 4 project, you create it inside the week 4 folder, right? Create a new file called index.html. Okay. So we have this HTML page. So we're going to now insert a snippet for this. This is just going to be a basic HTML page. But what I'm going to want to do is now add Bootstrap to this. Okay, so what is Bootstrap? Bootstrap is it's a framework. It's a front-end framework, and basically they give you CSS and JavaScript files that you can use in your project. Why is that cool? I'll show you. Writing CSS can be a pain sometimes, especially if you want to write your custom CSS. But CSS frameworks enable you to write responsive web front ends that will adjust for different devices, and they already have styles to them, and they already have visibility and everything like that. So you can see we'll just pretty much walk through the Bootstrap website and at least some of it, and I'll just explain very briefly some of the things that are involved. So at this point, you should have had some HTML and CSS background, and basically a lot of things just revolve around div tags, which are like page divisions, and because Bootstrap will give you a CSS file, you basically have access to all of their tags, all their classes, and not their tags, but their classes and their things like that. But basically, if we go to, let's see, we start with columns and rows. This is basically a grid system by which you can look at your web page, and it helps you divide up your design. So let's say you have a page design where you want to put something on the left half and something on the right half, right? Well, in order to do that, you need to first create a row right here, like this. So a div with the class row, and then you need to create a column, and then so basically it's a 12-column grid system, right? So whatever your column ratio is, so they have different column ratios in these 4 rows. They have to add up to number 12. So 6 plus 6 is 12, 4 plus 4 plus 4 is 12, or 8 plus 4 is 12. But basically, you just need to add up to 12, and you can divide up the columns based off of the ratio you would like, right? So this would be like 50-50, right? So you have so half of the page is so the left is going to be a division on this row, the left side and a right side. You can also change it to fluid width. These are all different slight technical things that you actually need to experiment with to figure out. And basically, you have different sizes like small, medium, large, or extra small, I think, or sorry, extra small, medium, small. These little letters in between the columns, so column, extra small, they're for certain devices, and you're going to need to look those up. But basically, you can make a certain row column. You can make the column different for different devices. So that means for an extra small device, this is going to be 6. It's going to take half. For a small device, it's only going to take 4, right? So basically, this little content right here would be just like that. You can move columns around with offsets by adding an offset class. Like this will offset by 3. So you'll see there's an invisible 3 here, and then this is like a concrete 3, and then invisible here 3. But basically, they're moving, they're offsetting these columns. So you can there's a lot you can do. You really need to kind of experiment and see how it all turns out. let's see. They have some default typography that you can use, and so if you use their headers, their H1 through H6 tags with these .h1 class and .h6 class, they kind of auto style it for you in the typography. And you can, they also have like just their default and standard sizing. So really, a lot of this is just researching the classes that they use and using the knowledge that you've learned in your CSS courses to basically supplement. Have some code formatting too, like let's say you want your web page to include code in it. You can use some of their code features to do that, their code styling. They also have styling for tables. A lot of this stuff would take you a lot of time to write yourself, and it's using a CSS framework is really a good way to just kind of get things up and running. It's nothing to be even ashamed of because many companies use CSS frameworks in commercial products. It's a very standard way of doing things. So you really just have to kind of go through this and see the different classes and how they affect the different tags. They auto style so many things for you. There's really a lot to look at. All this is just form stuff. Different classes can help you color forms for errors and warnings, and you won't need that for this project, but I'm just mentioning it for future reference. And then you have all these like nice button tags classes, different sizing options, active, disabled. You have some image features. You can put an image with a source to it, alternative text right here, and then you can basically shape it up, like making it a rounded image, circle, or thumbnail, or so many things you can do with Bootstrap. And it's all going to come down to kind of looking through this whole documentation here on getbootstrap.com. In addition to that, there are a lot of other things to look at. You have access to all these like icons, these glyphicons. You have like drop downs, button groups. These are all like this kind of components that come with Bootstrap. In addition to the regular CSS styling, you have navigation bars. Like they help you kind of just have a default navigational style. You have breadcrumbs, pagination. Some of this stuff, a lot of this stuff you won't use, but you might use something like Jumbotron. And it's basically you can basically use this kind of a display feature right here, and it will basically extend this entire viewport. Really, you have to try it out to see. I mean, there's very little to really discuss on this issue, on the issue of Jumbotrons and some of these components. But you really should just look through it, look through all these components, just have a glance over it before you actually do your portfolio. So they might even give you some ideas of what to use, some of the features that they have. Progress bars you probably won't use, but this might be something you might use. This media organization. Let's say you have some media in your portfolio and you want to organize them, maybe images, videos, or things like that, and you want to organize them in a hierarchical manner. You can kind of do that right here. It's kind of cool. Yeah, there's really a lot of things. Panels are probably something you'll use to kind of look through panels, I would say. You can embed videos and things like that. And they're usually responsive, so that what that usually means is whether you view this on a mobile device, if you use their classes, if you use the these classes that they've given you in Bootstrap, then it'll adjust the panel to the device. So plenty of things to go through, plenty of things you have right at your fingertips just by using their classes, glyphicons, etc. You also have this JavaScript tab, and you have all sorts of things like transitions, modals. A lot of this stuff you probably won't use, but you might. You can go through this. The JavaScript stuff is a lot more involved, but you might use something like the carousel right here. It's just like a little JavaScript component, and you can just kind of slide through images. You just need to post the images like right here. You'll have to look at it for yourself, but you probably don't want to do much customizing if you use the carousel. That may be out of scope, but it's there for you. The JavaScript stuff is there for you as well. So it really depends on if you actually want to, really use all this stuff. But in order to actually use all of these things, you need to bring it into your project. So I'm going to move to the Getting Started tab. And there's so many ways you can actually get Bootstrap into your project. I'm going to only require one, and that's going to be to download Bootstrap. One of the reasons why is you probably want to be able to use this offline. A lot of people use what's called the CDN, and basically what happens with the Bootstrap CDN is that you can just include these tags into your code. The head section. Oops. I'm going to just format these. Oops. I'm using tabs to just format these, just put them all in line. But basically, what this prevents me from doing is including the CSS files that I downloaded into Bootstrap, and basically, it's going to reference those files online. This is really nice. It's a really nice feature. There's always the weird risk of these CDNs not working anymore, and then your styles won't actually work on your website. It's a low probability. But for this course, we're going to include the files just so that we can actually have the possibility of using them offline. So in order to use these files, you need to be connected to the internet. So I'm going to remove them for now. Let's go back to the actual Bootstrap page. We'll download the Bootstrap distribution. So it should end up going to my downloads folder. So it is here. This is the Bootstrap 3.3.7 distribution. It has the CSS, fonts, and JS files here. I'm going to copy all these. I'm going to go to my folder, Week 4. I'm going to copy them right next to the index.html page. Okay, so now I have all this stuff. I have this JavaScript stuff, I have this fonts, I have this CSS thing, so many things I have. And I have this index.html. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and make my first commit, just to show you what this workflow is kind of like. So I'll save this HTML page, even though it's not connected to Bootstrap yet. But notice I have so many of these files here. Let me revert this. DS stores are a Mac specific thing. I'll fix that so it doesn't happen in the future. But basically, you have all of these files now that need to be staged. Um, I can really select all of them if I want, like by clicking on one, pressing Shift and clicking on the last, and I can right click, and I can basically stage or discard or whatever, or things like that. But in order to commit these files, and a commit is basically like saving all of these changes to the project, to the GitHub repository, at least the local one, right? Um, in order to make changes, in order to save all these, I need to stage them, right? So the couple ways I can do that. Let me show you both, and I'll probably do like one at a time, right? So let's take, oops, wrong one. Okay. Actually, let me probably select this better size. Okay, so I'm in this repo, right? I can type in first git status. Git status is showing me that there's all these folders. These folders have files in them. It's not showing me, but they do. And then I have this new index.html file. There's so many ways I can stage these. Okay, so before I commit files, I need to stage them. Okay, so I can stage whole folders. I can do something like this. In order to stage a folder, I need to do git add week 4. So basically what this is going to do is going to stage this folder, week 4, and all of the files in it. But I'm not going to do that because there's a possibility that there are files that I don't want to stage. I don't want to include. So I like to be a little meticulous with my efforts, with my work. Right now, just for demo's sake, I'm just going to add the index file. Okay. All right. So I staged by saying git add index week 4 / index.html. I can type in git status again. Now you'll notice something interesting. This index file is in a different category, right? There's now 2 categories. One is called untracked files, right? So these are unstaged; they're not staged yet. And this is now this says changes to be committed on portfolio, right? So I could technically commit this file and leave these ones unstaged, but I actually just want to commit everything, and just to have an initial commit. Okay. So in order to do that, I can just add the rest of these files, or the rest of these files. But I'm just going to use VS Code at this point. So I'm going back to VS Code now. No, I made the command line change to add index to stage index, the index file. But note, so now this index file is identified as staged in VS Code. But these are still changes that are not staged, but I want them to be staged. I'm looking through all these files and they look like things that I want in my project. So I'm really going to shift select all of these, and so click the first one, and then hold down shift, click the last one, and then right click and stage changes. There you go. All these files came here now in the staged changes. In order to commit, I can do one of 2 things. I can type in the command I'll just okay. I can commit files with this command git commit -m. I'll show you the status again. Notice that all of the files are now in this staged portion. changes to be committed. I can do git commit -m initial commit. I'm not going to run it here because it's going to do the same. I'm just going to do the same thing in Visual Studio Code. But I can run that command, and that would basically commit all of these changes to that commit message. But I'm just going to do it here. All of these files are now staged. There's nothing in the changes. I can now type in a commit message right here. So it basically says message, and you type in the message. And then it asks me to write command enter. For you, it might be control enter. So I'm going to type in command enter. And it committed my changes. That was it. If I type in git status, nothing to commit. Working tree is clean. That means I can actually create a new branch if I want. But I don't really want to do that. What I actually want to do is eventually push my branch and create a pull request. So here's how I would do that. Actually, before I do that, I'm actually going to include Bootstrap in the project. Okay, so I've just pasted these. Let me just put this to the side. Okay. Ooh, need to remove this. Don't really need these. So I've just pasted this code right here. This is really all I need. This change right here enables me to have Bootstrap features, and I'll explain what they are right now. Notice the CSS has a bootstrap min.css. Just as you would include your custom CSS, you can include the Bootstrap CSS this way. And you previously would have already added your custom CSS in your project, but it's equivalent to not writing your own CSS and including Bootstrap in your project. You can also include your own CSS too, just below this one, and that would override, make those changes as well. And if you want to add additional custom CSS, you may not actually want to, but you could. The very fact that these are .min they are compressed. I'll actually show you by opening it. This is Bootstrap CSS, right? This is all in a nicely readable, formatted way. But because of all the white spaces, it makes the file a lot bigger. So what people often do when using their CSS files is they minify them. And by minifying them, it basically removed all of the unnecessary spaces in this case, and it made the file a lot smaller. But it's really hard to read. So when you're using, when you've deployed your website in production, you probably want to use a minified version, so that things will just run faster. Same thing with the JS file. There's a JS file where it's minified as well. And usually JavaScript minifiers do a lot more. They'll actually change variable names and stuff like that, and to make them really small, and it really reduces the size of the file, which will make the page load faster. But you could just as easily remove the .min, and you could just import the regular one as well. And there's a place for doing that, especially when you're debugging problems. You probably won't be doing that, but if you do end up debugging problems, then you probably want to remove the min here, so that instead of pointing to the min version, this bootstrap.css, it'll point to bootstrap.css. So I've just connected this right now. I'll save this file. It should be saved already. I'll go to um, the Git tab again. Notice only one file is revealed. Well, I've committed all the other files in the previous commit, right? Now I added some changes, and this file has some new lines. Notice that I have this sort of green bar here. This green bar tells me what code I changed in my file. You should have that too. I don't know if you actually will, but you should. I can go to these changes now that they're actually code changes. I can double click, and it'll actually show me what these changes are. The left side is what used to be there, and basically this is line 6 and this is line 7. And this right side is what I've added. It's showing me a difference of what I've added. The differences between the last commit, which was the initial commit that we made, and these changes, which are these 3 lines. So it's showing me the net change that I'm making. And this is very helpful when you're reviewing your own code. It's also very helpful when you're reviewing other people's code. I can close this viewer right here, and I can now stage this. So I could right click it as I've done before, or I could also do this plus sign. Plus sign will stage the change, and I'm going to type in a message connecting Bootstrap. The message can be whatever you want. Try to make it as descriptive as you can so that you know what changes you're making. There you go. I committed another change. I now have 2 changes that I've committed. Well, here's the interesting thing. We talked about branches before, right? Like this portfolio branch that I'm now using. I can click on this thing, on this little branch name here, and it opened a couple other things. Now don't worry about these right now, they're not too important for you. But basically, if I clicked on master, well, it doesn't have my changes. It doesn't have the HTML changes or the CSS changes. Well, that's because the changes that we committed are on the portfolio branch. It's like a copy of your code with the differences. And I'm using a bad analogy, but I'm using this analogy just so it's somewhat digestible for now. So if I go click on master again, click on portfolio, all those files are back because they were committed to the portfolio branch, not the master branch. Okay. So now that I have all these files here, I now have the index.html. It's connected to Bootstrap. Let's say I made some changes to my index.html. And you wrote all your other code and stuff. I'm just skipping that portion. I want to go back to the Git here, the Git tab, stage it, and add a message. And you can make as many changes as you want. But the smaller your changes, the smaller your commit messages, it's easy for reviewers to track sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you'd rather include all of it at once. It really depends. Okay. Well, let's say I want to test this code, right? One way I can test this code is actually to go in the folder. So I can right-click on index.html. I can, and there are a lot of other ways to do it too. A lot of really good ways. You can probably do certain things inside VS Code. I'm going to show you the really simple way. For you, it'll be something else. But basically, I open this folder right here. I'm just going to double-click the index.html. There you go. It's already using the Bootstrap styles. So I have this project. It's connected to Bootstrap. I've committed. I made those commit changes. I've opened the index.html in a browser, and it basically opened right here. And this style, it's already using Bootstrap. Okay. And with that commit, we'll kind of go to the next procedure, which would be, so we've added files, we've committed the files. You would have, at this point, you would have probably done even more because you're creating your portfolio. You would have added way more things. And then we're going to push this branch. The way we're going to do that is we can run this command, git push origin portfolio. You can run that in the command line, right? So I'll explain what these are really quick. But basically, the git client push command will push whatever you give it, either a branch or a tag, depending on what you give it. But in our case, it'll be branches. Forget tags for now. Origin is where you're pushing it to. And then the last thing that you type is portfolio, and then you type enter. Basically, I'll show you what's going on with this, right? So I'm running this command to view my remotes. Okay. By default, when you clone your repository, it creates a remote called origin, and it points to this URL. This URL can be GitHub, Bitbucket, or GitLab, or anything else. It doesn't necessarily have to be GitHub. But when you clone a GitHub repo, they automatically add this origin remote, right? You could theoretically type in the whole URL. So you can say git push instead of origin, you could theoretically write this whole thing right here. But it's not useful when you're doing things really fast and you're trying to push things and things like that. But if I type in git push origin portfolio, it will push my branch up to GitHub. I'll show you that. But I'm not going to run it. I'm not going to run it via command line. I'm actually just going to show you via VS Code. Go to the Git tab, ellipses right here, and push. Oh, it looks like it doesn't have an upstream branch. 1 minute. Okay, that's no problem. Let's try this. Okay, that's the way to do it. I'm sorry. So click on publish branch, not push. Publish branch, because it's a new branch. And it's going to ask you, pick a remote to publish the branch portfolio to. Origin, right? I can either click on that or I can press enter. I'm pressing enter. So now Git is working. It's attempting to push this. But it says I have an issue. Can't push refs to remote. Interesting. Oh, okay, no problem. So it looks like it's expecting us to use an upstream remote. We'll just do that really quick. So this will be a manual command you probably have to run. Okay, notice that we already had an origin remote. We're going to add an upstream remote with the same name. So basically, because the origin remote came by default, we're going to add an upstream remote just so VS Code can do things a lot easier. Okay, I've added that remote. So git client, add a new remote, add with the name upstream and the same URL. If I type in git remote, these are things you only have to do once. Oh. I now have an upstream. Let's give that a try now in VS Code. Sorry, I think I used the wrong one. No. branch. Publish branch. Publish branch. I'll try upstream. First, integrate your changes. Looks like I'm having an issue here. Oh, I guess that was it. So push 2 is the one we need to use. My apologies. These other ones are for very contextual issues. I usually do this manually, but I guess you can use push 2. Looks like it completed. So in order to prove that, let's go to the GitHub page and branch. So I guess not. There is a problem. Okay, so it looks like we have a little bit of trouble with the git push portion. I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm actually just going to continue with the command line option instead. Okay, and that was quick. It rejected. What's going on? Oh, I have a permissioning error. What is that? Looks like my push failed. That's probably why VS Code wasn't able to push either. But I'm going to try to fix it in the background, primarily because on my machine I have other things set up and other Git accounts set up, and there may be a conflict because of that. You shouldn't really have this conflict. Instead, what should happen when you try to push a branch is that you should get a user password request. It should ask you for your username and your password. And I think that should be your email and your password, or your GitHub username and GitHub password. So should be one or the other. But let me try to fix this, and I'll get back to this.